August 21, 1942. The mouth of the Ilu River on Guadalcanal lay silent beneath the heavy Pacific night. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki watched nearly 1,000 elite infantry crouched in the dark, convinced that courage and cold steel would tear through a thin American line. Japanese doctrine insisted the United States depended on machines, not men. But waiting in the shadows were Marines armed with short-barreled shotguns loaded with heavy buckshot, devastating at 20 yards. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe for more World War II content. Japanese infantry doctrine in 1942 was built on the belief that superior willpower could shatter any defensive line. Officers educated in the old martial code saw warfare as a test of spiritual resolve, not a competition of equipment. Training emphasized bayonet charges, night infiltration, and silent approach. Recruits learned to crawl through darkness, close distance without firing, and erupt from the shadows with steel flashing. Against foes lacking discipline, this philosophy seemed unstoppable. In China and Southeast Asia, these tactics crushed opponents unprepared for sudden close-quarters violence. American Marines, however, represented a different kind of resistance. They studied enemy patterns and adjusted quietly. Weeks of fighting around Guadalcanal revealed the Japanese preference for darkness, for psychological intimidation, and for sudden rushes that ignored casualties. Marine commanders responded by reinforcing perimeters, creating overlapping firing arcs, and positioning veterans at choke points. They understood that the Japanese intended to transform battles into hand-to-hand contests. Determined to prevent that, they designed kill zones that would destroy momentum before blades ever touched cloth. Meanwhile, Japanese officers saw firearms as tools, not decisive factors. They expected rifles and machine guns to falter when their troops closed the distance. Manuals insisted Americans lacked the will to stand firm under a screaming charge. Their worldview treated courage like armor. But courage cannot thicken the air between pellets. Marines drilled with restraint. They were taught to wait until attackers filled their sights, to conserve ammunition, and to avoid panic fire. Every squad carried a blend of weapons chosen for range and proximity. Automatic rifles for suppression, grenades for clusters, and quietly, the tool designed for the exact range where Japanese doctrine thrived. As both armies prepared for their decisive clash near the Ilu River, each carried confidence shaped by previous victories. One side believed the human spirit would triumph over technology. The other trusted mathematics, controlled bursts, and prepared ground. The night would reveal which vision belonged to history and which belonged to the future. The shotgun that would reshape close-quarters combat in the Pacific did not begin as a military invention. The Winchester Model 12 started life as a sporting firearm, introduced in 1912 for hunters chasing birds and small game. Its smooth pump action, internal hammer, and robust steel receiver made it dependable in rain, mud, and grit. Those qualities alone attracted military attention, but hidden within its steel and walnut was a feature that would horrify anyone caught within 20 yards. Unlike most repeating shotguns, the Model 12 could fire the instant its action slammed shut. By holding down the trigger and rapidly cycling the pump, an operator unleashed all 6 shells in the magazine in roughly 3 seconds. There was no pause for trigger resetting, no hesitation between blasts. Each shell contained 9 large pellets of buckshot, roughly the diameter of 1/3 of an inch. At jungle distances, they scattered just enough to create a deadly pattern, while retaining the concentrated energy to tear through flesh and bone. When World War I erupted, trench networks cramped soldiers into spaces no rifle was designed for. The U.S. adapted the Model 12, into the infamous trench gun, shortened barrel, metal heat shield, and bayonet lug. In the narrow, suffocating ditches of Europe, even hardened veterans remembered the echo of slam-fire blasts shaking mud from the walls. German authorities protested formally, claiming the wounds were too devastating to be humane. They threatened execution for captured shotgun users. Washington replied calmly that any such act would invite equal retaliation. The shotgun stayed. Between the wars, its design evolved little because it worked. Soldiers trained to maintain rhythm with the pump, using their offhand to load single shells when magazines ran dry. Maintenance was simple. Mud wiped away. Springs replaced easily. Most importantly, the weapon required almost no marksmanship finesse at short ranges. Aim at the chest. Work the pump. Enemies fell. When the United States marched into island jungles, commanders recognized they had accidentally inherited the perfect storm. Thick vegetation, night attacks, and close engagement distances. The Model 12 was no longer a hunting tool. It was now a brush-clearing instrument that would devastate any army relying on bayonets to bridge the gap. What made the combat shotgun terrifying was not merely the weapon itself, but the ammunition it spat into the darkness. Each shell was packed with 9 heavy balls of buckshot, each roughly the diameter of 1/3 of an inch. Multiply that by 6 shells, and you have more than 50 projectiles launched in less than 3 seconds when slam fire was used. At ranges common in Pacific fighting, where visibility was measured in yards and feet, those pellets formed a dense cluster that struck like a fist made of lead. At 10 yards, the pattern was scarcely larger than a dinner plate. At 20 yards, perhaps 2 feet wide. Within that space, there was almost no escape. Unlike single rifle bullets, each pellet carried enough energy to punch deep into muscle, shatter bone, and rip tissue. When several struck at once, the impact could send a man tumbling backward. Wounds were catastrophic, sometimes indistinguishable from multiple gunshots arriving simultaneously. It was, in mechanical terms, compound trauma delivered instantly. Against tightly packed troops surging forward, the effect multiplied. 2, 3, even 4 attackers could be hit from one trigger pull. In the restricted sightlines of Guadalcanal's palm groves, Japanese soldiers often charged shoulder to shoulder. The shotgun exploited that spacing mercilessly. A Marine only had to aim center mass. Precision was unnecessary. The spread compensated for adrenaline tremors, smoke, and sweat. The pellets did the rest. Buckshot also behaved unpredictably in tight spaces. Inside bunkers, reinforced holes, or cave mouths, pellets could ricochet, striking defenders hiding behind corners. The confined walls amplified lethality, bouncing fragments into eyes, throats, and torsos. Rifle rounds typically buried into dirt. Buckshot lingered, shredding whoever shared the room. The psychological weight of knowing a single blast could drop several men at once fed rumors. Japanese survivors reported seeing comrades collapse without understanding why. Even in darkness, the booming shock carried dread. Warriors trained to endure rifle fire began to hesitate when they heard that deep thunder. In close combat, hesitation is defeat. As the campaign continued, Marines learned to conserve shells and wait. They held fire until the enemy filled the site. Then, one pump, one roar, and entire bursts of momentum disappeared. It was not graceful. It was not elegant. It was brutally effective, shaped by physics rather than valor. Weeks of skirmishes on Guadalcanal taught the Marines hard lessons about how their enemy preferred to operate. Japanese infantry rarely launched major attacks in daylight unless forced. Instead, they moved at night, crawling through blackness so thick that silhouettes blended with tree trunks. Their scouts mapped perimeters, memorized firing lanes, and searched for gaps between foxholes. Sometimes, a Marine would wake to find footprints inches from his face, evidence that the enemy had slithered past in the dark. The Japanese goal was to dissolve the American line by slipping knives past barrels. Marine leadership responded with calm precision. They reshaped their defensive positions into interlocking zones, creating overlapping fields that punished any thrust. Communication wires linked squads. Listening posts sat forward, eyes wide, alert for whispers and snapping twigs. Most importantly, officers placed shotgun carriers at the spots most likely to be penetrated. These men were not new recruits. They were steady hands, veterans capable of waiting until the perfect moment. The Japanese believed once they closed inside rifle range, they would win automatically. But the Marines quietly shifted the rules. Instead of relying on long-range marksmanship, they prepared for sudden, intimate violence. They stacked ammunition neatly in shallow pits, memorized firing arcs, and cut brush to channel attackers into tight funnels. When movement rustled, they froze, fingers ready, hearts steady. Night after night, tension built. Japanese patrols probed gently, retreating when flares burst overhead. Every encounter taught the Marines something new about spacing, timing, and angles. Shotgun operators noted how charging soldiers bunched naturally while crossing uneven ground. They practiced holding fire until they saw more than one target. Marine gunners learned to coordinate by sound, recognizing where blasts would complement machine gun bursts. The Japanese, for their part, mistook the relative quiet for fear. Their officers reported soft morale, weak resolve, and brittle nerves among the Americans. Those assessments poisoned Japanese strategy. They marched confidently toward a storm they could not yet imagine. At the mouth of the river, under a moon smothered by clouds, the stage was set. One force prepared for ritual fury. The other waited with cold calculation. Shortly after 1:30 in the morning, the stillness along the mouth of the Ilu River finally shattered. The Japanese signal flared, and nearly 1,000 infantry surged forward across the pale ribbon of sand that stretched toward the Marine perimeter. Their officers shouted commands, bayonets gleamed under faint starlight, and the pounding of boots echoed like distant drums. The charge began exactly as doctrine demanded. Confidence, volume, and overwhelming speed. For the first few breaths of the assault, it looked as though momentum alone might push through. Marines held their positions, invisible behind earthworks and log revetments. They waited. Officers hissed for discipline. Machine gun teams tracked the approaching silhouettes but did not fire. Then, at 20 yards, everything detonated. A line of Browning guns ripped open, spitting lead that stitched glowing arcs across the sandbar. The front ranks stumbled, fell, and vanished beneath boots as the wave behind trampled forward. That was when the shotguns joined the chorus. Their deep, thunderous booms cut through the metallic chatter, each blast scattering heavy pellets into clusters of men. Marines used slam fire, cycling the pump while holding the trigger, unleashing bursts so rapid the air seemed to shudder. Japanese soldiers were hurled backward, bodies contorted by the simultaneous strikes of multiple pellets. Those not hit directly felt the spray bite into arms and legs, shredding momentum and forcing them to crawl. The sandbar funneled the attackers into tight lanes, where shot patterns overlapped. Every step forward exposed more torsos to buckshot. Bayonets, deadly at arm's length, were useless when the defenders kept the distance exact. Officers shouted for their troops to press on, but casualties multiplied faster than commands could lift spirits. The dead formed barriers, and the living struggled over them, breaking formation into chaotic knots. Machine guns chattered without pause. Rifles snapped in disciplined rhythm. But the shotguns owned the nearest ground. Each Marine armed with one became a wall, turning clusters of attackers into collapsing piles. Screams filled the darkness, mixing with smoke and flying sand. The charge, once a roaring engine of morale, sputtered into scattered pockets of men crawling, hiding, or fleeing. The night belonged not to spirit, but to prepared hands working iron. As the Japanese charge faltered, the battle transformed from explosive chaos into something quieter and more mathematical. A bayonet rush depended on momentum, but momentum cannot survive when every step forward removes multiple bodies from the front. The Marines did not need to be everywhere. They only needed to fire faster than the attackers could replace the fallen. Shotgun blasts cut through lines that were already thinning, and the rhythm of slam fire created patterns the human mind could not counter. Each pull of the pump sent multiple pellets into tightly grouped chests, shredding lungs and severing arteries. Officers attempted to rally their men, waving swords and screaming orders, but their silhouettes made perfect targets. Marine riflemen picked them off with calm precision. Without leadership, clusters of soldiers pressed forward randomly, creating even tighter bunches that magnified the shotgun's effect. Meanwhile, machine guns stitched horizontal lanes into the sandbar, turning what was once an open path into a slaughterhouse corridor. Some attackers attempted to crawl, trying to close the distance unnoticed, but buckshot ignores size and posture. The pellets simply punched downward, finding meat. The sandbar itself betrayed the charge. Bodies piled knee-high in places, forcing survivors to climb rather than sprint. Once airborne over a fallen comrade, they became perfect mid-step silhouettes, easy targets for Marines conserving ammunition. Each time the Japanese threatened to reorganize, another wave of slam fire blasts broke their attempt. The shotgun did not care who led or who followed. It punished the group. Psychology also shifted. The deep, thumping roar of buckshot created a sound unlike rifles or automatics. It was thick, concussive, primal. Soldiers trained to endure crackling rifle fire found themselves hesitating at that boom. Hesitation widened the kill zone. A paused heartbeat purchased distance for defenders. In these moments, courage was irrelevant. The men on the sandbar faced not individuals, but physics. At the ranges dictated by terrain and darkness, 9 pellets from each shell owned the air. Spirit, training, and ritual collided with geometry, and geometry never blinked. Once the advance slowed, it effectively ended. Momentum that breaks becomes momentum that dies. As dawn crept across the coastline, the battlefield revealed something far more significant than a failed assault. Marines walking the sandbar navigated between bodies stiff with impact wounds, many clustered in tight bunches where one blast had hit multiple men. The spectacle was sobering. It marked not only a tactical victory, but a psychological shift neither side would forget. News traveled quickly through dugouts, command posts, and mess lines. The short-barreled shotgun was a nightmare at close range. Marines who witnessed its effect rarely questioned its weight again. Even riflemen began to defer lanes of fire to shotgun operators when movement flashed in the dark. On the Japanese side, rumors spread just as fast. Survivors of future missions spoke of the big-mouth thunder guns, describing wounds unlike anything they had seen. Officers debated whether such weapons violated international agreements, echoing complaints made decades earlier in Europe. Some units attempted to modify their doctrine, substituting cautious probes for massed charges. Yet the very foundation of that doctrine, spirit over lead, prevented full adaptation. It was difficult to convince soldiers raised on tradition that the moment they closed distance, technology would erase them. Interrogated prisoners consistently mentioned the terror of facing multiple projectiles in a single instant. Unlike rifle bullets, which left neat punctures, buckshot ripped flesh in wide patterns. Medics reported horrifying injuries, clusters of holes where chests, arms, and faces had once been intact. Those who survived such impacts often never returned to their units. Physical trauma blended with nightmares, reinforcing a growing realization that proximity favored the defender, not the attacker. Marine leadership took note. Shotgun training expanded. Operators learned to hold steady, wait for the perfect silhouette, then unleash rapid slam fire. Some commanders ordered shotgunners to remain hidden until the last 10 yards, maximizing shock. These adjustments deepened the weapon's already fearsome reputation. The battlefield after Ichiki's charge became a case study whispered at command briefings. Across islands, as new assaults formed in jungle heat, commanders remembered the sandbar. And in those humid nights, the distant echo of a booming blast began to haunt attackers long before they saw the men who held the guns. As operations shifted to new islands, the shotgun quietly evolved from a niche tool into a cornerstone of close-range defense. On Tarawa, where Japanese bunkers were packed with defenders who refused to surrender, Marines found that buckshot didn't respect cover. Pellet strikes ricocheted off concrete, copper piping, and steel plates, turning enclosed spaces into violent echo chambers. The confined blasts stunned defenders, even if they weren't directly hit, breaking morale as much as bodies. Infantrymen advancing behind shotgun operators felt confidence replace fear. Later on, Saipan, a massive pre-dawn assault tested everything Marines had learned. Thousands of Japanese soldiers charged in a tidal wave of screams and bayonets. Riflemen fired until barrels glowed, machine guns roared, and artillery thundered, yet gaps still appeared in the line. Shotgunners stepped into those breaches, unleashing rolling walls of lead that shredded the charge's momentum. Men who had once believed proximity meant advantage now discovered it meant death. Afterward, Marines collected weapons and personal items scattered across ground littered with bodies. Many noted the stunned expressions frozen on attackers' faces, a haunting reminder that expectation had collided with reality. By Iwo Jima, the shotgun's reputation was legendary. Marines descending into caves, where sound alone could disorient, relied on slam fire bursts to clear cramped corridors. The booming blasts rolled through tunnels, cutting through darkness more effectively than grenades. Veterans claimed you could feel the fear leave the enemy when that familiar thunder echoed underground. In response, Japanese units attempted new tactics. Scouts crawled ahead to locate shotgun operators, hoping to eliminate them before an attack. But with every Marine squad structured to protect its specialist, the attempts often ended in failure and additional casualties. Officers wrote field notes describing these weapons as disproportionate threats. Morale reports contained references to the dreaded scattergun, reinforcing intelligence assessments that fear was spreading faster than ammunition. Through repeated engagements, one truth became undeniable. Close combat no longer favored the attacker. Every failed assault drained resources, manpower, and spirit. The shotgun had helped flip one of Japan's strongest doctrines on its head. When the Pacific War finally ended, analysts struggled to quantify the shotgun's exact contribution. It had not sunk ships or toppled cities, yet its fingerprints were on countless defensive victories. In close quarters fighting, no other infantry weapon so completely disrupted Japanese assumptions. Post-war reports showed casualty ratios significantly spiking whenever shotgun-equipped Marines manned perimeter lines. Strategists noted that the weapon altered battlefield geometry, extending a deadly invisible bubble around American positions. It turned infiltration routes into fatal funnels, where training and courage dissolved against mechanical efficiency. Historians later argued that the shotgun's psychological impact rivaled its physical lethality. Survivors remembered the deep, concussive blasts, the abrupt collapse of squads, and the eerie quiet that followed. It carved into memory a lingering dread. Veterans rarely bragged about using them. Instead, they spoke in careful tones of necessity and grim duty. The weapon's simplicity had enabled astonishing violence at arm's length. For Marines who carried it, the weight became symbolic. It meant responsibility. It meant the last line would not break. On the Japanese side, post-war military theorists dissected what went wrong. They conceded that devotion to spirit had collided with a weapon optimized for brutal efficiency. Reports concluded that infantry doctrine must evolve with firearms technology, not defy it. Close-range combat, once a cultural advantage, revealed itself as a weakness when the defender held the right tool. The Model 12 eventually served in Korea and Vietnam. Jungle patrols rediscovered the same advantage Marines on Guadalcanal had seen. Dense vegetation shortens engagement distance. Buckshot thrives there. New pump-action designs would follow, but their lineage traced back to trenches, sandbars, and humid cave mouths. Today, museums display trench guns behind glass. Tourists walk past without realizing the terror those short barrels once invoked. Veterans who remember say the shotgun represented something pure about warfare, a moment where training, timing, and nerve decided everything. It didn't rely on long sightlines, elaborate machinery, or perfect accuracy. It demanded calm at the exact instant chaos arrived. Legacy is measured not just in kills, but in how a weapon reshapes the enemy's worldview. Japanese commanders once believed valor conquered all. After the Pacific Campaign, no survivor held that illusion. In the end, industrial firepower humbled spiritual ferocity. And the boom of a trench gun at 20 yards proved that sometimes the smallest battlefield radius leaves the largest historical wound.